The wallet hit the marble floor of the Northline lobby without a sound anyone would later remember. Aaron Kessler was already at the revolving door, a tool bag over one shoulder, when it slipped from his back pocket. Nadine Calvert saw it fall. She crossed the polished floor, bent, and picked it up. She opened it to find a name. Instead, she found a photograph, soft at the corners from years of handling. A young woman stood in it, laughing, beside a man she did not know. The woman was her mother. Nadine went still. Behind her, Aaron turned back. "That's mine," Aaron said. He said it plainly, the way a man says a thing that is simply true, and held out his hand. Nadine did not give it back right away. She was looking at the photograph, and then she was looking at him, and then she was looking at the photograph again, comparing the line of a stranger's jaw across 30 years, and finding nothing that explained anything. "Where did you get this?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was my father's. Aaron's hand stayed open between them. "Everything else in there is cards and a gas receipt. If you're worried about the $20, keep it." She turned the photo so he could see it. "This woman, do you know her name?" He looked at it the way people look at something they have seen 10,000 times and never once. "No," he said. "My dad never said. He carried it until he died. Then I did. It's the only picture I have of him standing next to somebody who looks that happy." Nadine's thumb pressed the worn corner. The woman in the picture was younger than Nadine was now, hair loose, head tipped back mid-laugh, and there was a building behind her that Nadine had walked past every morning for 11 years. She knew that laugh. She had spent her whole childhood trying to earn it. "Her name was Marion Calvert," Nadine said. "She founded this company. She was my mother." Something moved behind Aaron's eyes and then went carefully flat. "I'm sorry," he said. "For your loss. She died 4 years ago." Nadine handed the wallet back, and the photograph with it, though her fingers were slow to let go. "Your father." What was his name? David Kessler. The name meant nothing to her, and that was the first wrong thing. She knew the name of every person who had ever mattered to her mother. She had the founder's biography memorized because she had helped write it. There was no David Kessler in it. There was no David Kessler anywhere. "You do maintenance here," she said, reading the badge clipped to his bag. "Contract. The calibration unit's on the 3rd floor. I finish the run Thursday." He shouldered the bag. "I should get back to my daughter. Thank you for picking it up." He was at the door before she found the next sentence, and by then it was too late to say it. She stood in the lobby with the after-image of her mother's face still hanging in the air, and a question she could not put down. Her mother had told her everything. The story of the first loan, the first order, the first winter they could not make payroll. She had never once mentioned a man named David Kessler, or the fact that in the oldest photograph of the company, the one Nadine had never been allowed to see, her mother had not been standing alone. That night, Nadine did what she always did with a problem she could not solve at once. She wrote it down. The name typed into every internal system the company owned, and out of all of it came back exactly one line, an archived payroll record from a year she had been too young to remember. Terminated, no reason given, the file sealed. She read it 3 times. Then she sat in the dark of her kitchen and looked at that single grudging line, and felt, for the first time since the funeral, that she had not known her mother at all. The fault on the 3rd floor announced itself at 9:40 on Thursday morning as a red cascade across every screen in the calibration bay. The line that measured the tolerance on Northline's flagship instrument had begun rejecting parts that were not defective, then passing parts that were, and the 2 senior engineers standing over it had been arguing about firmware for 40 minutes when Aaron came through with his cart. He set down his coffee. He watched the numbers a while, the way a man watches weather. Then he crouched at the base of the housing, put 2 fingers against a coolant line, and held them there. "Your reference block is drifting," he said. "It's not the software. The chiller's short-cycling, and the block never settles to temperature before you take the reading. You're calibrating against a moving target." The younger engineer laughed, not kindly. "We had the chiller serviced in March. Serviced isn't fixed." Aaron traced the line to a valve, tapped it once. "This is sticking. Warm reading, cold reading, it splits the difference and calls it truth. Swap the valve, let the block sit 20 minutes, run your standards again. It'll come back." They did not want to try it, so they tried everything else first, and at 11:20 they swapped the valve and let the block sit and ran the standards, and the line came back. By then, Nadine was standing at the glass. She had come down because the plant manager had used the word shutdown, and she had stayed because a contract technician with a gas receipt in his wallet had walked into a problem her people could not solve and named it in 90 seconds. He had not gloated when it worked. He had gathered his tools, wiped the valve fitting clean, and moved on to the next unit as though he had done nothing at all. That afternoon she pulled his file. The staffing agency had 2 lines on him. Reliable, keeps to himself. So she looked further, because looking was what she was good at, and the further she looked, the less the 2 lines held. Aaron Kessler had a doctorate in mechanical engineering. He held 9 patents. For 11 years, he had been the lead design engineer at Halvorsen Precision, the firm whose sensors sat inside half the medical devices in the country, and for the last 3 of those years, he had been the man whose signature closed every design. Industry pages from 4 years back called him the best in the field. Then the record simply stopped. She found the reason in a 2-line obituary. Emily Kessler, 36, survived by her husband Aaron and their daughter. After that, there were no more patents, no more papers, no more Aaron Kessler at all, until a staffing agency logged a quiet man who was good with his hands and kept to himself. Nadine sat with the file open a long time. She thought about a man who had built the instruments other men only serviced, and who had chosen, after the worst thing, to become invisible on purpose. She thought about how easily she had almost let him walk out her door, and how rare it was, in her building, for anyone to fix a thing and then simply walk away from the credit. And underneath all of it, the other question turned and would not stop. A brilliant engineer, buried by grief. A father who had carried her mother's photograph to his grave, a name that belonged in the founder's story, and had been cut out of it clean. What, exactly, had her mother done, and who had made sure she never knew? She called the number on the contract herself, which surprised him. The valve. "You were right." Nadine kept her voice level. "I'd like to keep you on past Thursday. There's more equipment in this building than my people understand." "That's usually the way," Aaron said. There was a child's voice in the background, then the sound of a hand covering a phone. Then, muffled and gentle, "2 minutes, Joss, I promise." When he came back, his voice had changed, softened at the edges, the way a voice does when it has just spoken to someone it loves. They met the next morning, not over machines but over paper. Nadine had gone home the night before and opened the drawer in her mother's study that she had never fully emptied, the one with the reading glasses she could not throw away and the fountain pen that no longer worked. Under a folder of tax records, she had found a single sheet in her mother's hand. Undated. A list of names with lines drawn through most of them. Near the top, not crossed out, 3 words. The first partner. She showed it to Aaron because there was no one else who would understand what he was looking at. "My father died when I was 10, he said, turning the sheet toward the light. "I don't have much. He had a workshop in the garage, and he'd let me hand him tools. He built things that worked, and he didn't talk about where he'd worked before. My mother said once that he'd started something and been pushed out of it. I thought she meant a job. I was a kid. I didn't ask." "Pushed out," Nadine repeated. That's the word she used. He set the sheet down. "She said it the way you say a thing you're still angry about but can't fix. She passed a few years after him. So there's no one left to ask. Just me and a photograph." Josie appeared then, because Aaron had brought her. A Saturday, no school, and no one to leave her with, and she had waited in the outer office as long as an 8-year-old can wait, which is not long. She came to the doorway with a paper cup of water she had gotten from the cooler all by herself and was very proud of. "This is Miss Calvert," Aaron said. "Can you say hello?" "Hello." Josie looked around the big office with frank interest. "Is this your whole house?" "Just where I work," Nadine said, and something in her loosened. "Do you want to see the fish? There's a tank on the 4th floor." Josie looked at her father. Aaron nodded. The three of them rode the elevator up, and for 4 minutes there was no company, no photograph, no missing name, only a small girl with both palms flat against the glass, naming the fish colors out loud, and a man watching his daughter with the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to take an ordinary morning for granted. On the way down, Josie put her hand in Nadine's without being asked. Nadine did not know what to do with it, so she just held it, and was quietly startled by how much she did not want the elevator to reach the ground floor. 2 floors up, Curtis Hoyt was reviewing the week's building logs when a name on the contractor sheet caught his eye and held it. Kessler. He read it twice. Then he set the page down very carefully, the way a man sets down something he does not want to be seen reacting to, and he sat for a while, not moving, in the quiet of an office that had a great deal to lose. The Founders Archive lived in a climate-controlled room in the sub-basement, and almost no one went down there anymore. Nadine did, that Monday, with a key card that opened every door in the building. She found the incorporation file for Northline Instruments, dated the spring of 1984, and she read it standing up, and then she sat down. The company had been founded by 2 people. The articles named Marion Calvert and a second incorporator, whose name had been covered on the archived summary, not torn, not lost, but hidden, at some point, under a strip of correction tape that someone had pressed down flat and neat. Beneath the tape, when she held it to the light, was the ghost of letters. 6 of them. A K, and then a dissent she could not read, and at the end, an R. On the executive floor, there was a bronze plaque, the Founders Wall, that every visitor was walked past. It bore 1 name and 1 date and 1 face. Nadine had stood in front of it 100 times. She had never once thought to ask why a company built by 2 people commemorated only 1. She was still in the sub-basement when the door opened and an older woman stepped in, stopped, and pressed a hand to her collarbone. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I didn't think anyone came down here." Estelle. Nadine knew her by sight. Estelle Fenwick had been her mother's executive assistant for almost 30 years, and after Marion died, she had been moved, quietly, to a smaller title on a lower floor. "I didn't know you still had access." "I don't, mostly." Estelle's eyes went to the open file on the table and stayed there a beat too long. "Old habits. I come down sometimes. It's quiet." Nadine turned the covered page toward her. "Do you know who this was?" The silence lasted long enough to be an answer on its own. Estelle looked at the strip of correction tape the way a person looks at a locked door they used to have the key to. "I knew your mother a long time," she said finally. Her voice was even, but her hand had found the edge of the table and was holding it. There are things she carried that she didn't hand to anybody. She had her reasons. She always had her reasons. She stopped herself. "I should go. I have a thing at 4. She left too quickly for someone with nowhere to be. Nadine stood alone in the cold hum of the archive after the door closed. She had grown up believing her mother built the company out of nothing, by herself, against the world. It was the story she told at galas. The story she had believed the way you believe what you have never once had reason to doubt. Now there was a strip of correction tape and a woman who could not meet her eyes, and the story had a seam in it she could no longer unsee. She photographed the covered page and, later, showed Aaron the enlargement on her phone. They sat in a corner of the empty cafeteria after hours, the building humming around them, and neither of them said the obvious thing for a while, because saying it would make it real. 6 letters, Aaron said at last, ends in an R, starts with a K. He turned the phone a little, as if a different angle would give a different answer, and then set it down between them, face up, the covered name glowing in the dark like something that refused to stay buried. And Nadine, watching his hands go still, understood that a returned wallet had become, without either of them deciding it, a thing they were going to do together. The email came from Hoyt's office on Wednesday, copied to procurement, and it was very reasonable. In the interest of vendor consolidation, all third-party maintenance contracts were being reviewed. The calibration support contract would not be renewed past its current term. The technician currently on site was to complete his final tasks and turn in his badge by end of week. There was a line thanking him for his service. There was a paragraph about efficiency. Nadine read it twice and understood exactly what it was. She went up to the executive floor. Hoyt was expecting her. He had a way of being expecting her. Vendor consolidation, she said. It's overdue. He did not look up from his monitor at first, and when he did, his face was pleasant. We've got 4 agencies doing what one could. You've seen the numbers. The technician you're removing kept the calibration line from going down last week. My people couldn't, he could. Then I'm sure the agency will send someone else capable. Hoyt folded his hands. Nadine, you've been spending time in the sub-basement, pulling old files, talking to Estelle Fenwick. He let that sit. Your mother built something clean. I'd hate to watch you go digging in corners because a stranger dropped a wallet. Some corners are old for a reason. Let them be old. It was said gently, the way a man gives advice. It was also, unmistakably, a fence going up. He stays through the quarter, Nadine said. I'll move him to a facilities line under my office. That's my call to make, and I'm making it. For half a second, the pleasantness thinned, and she saw underneath it something she had never let herself see in him before. Not anger but calculation, fast and cold. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again, saying, Of course, you're building. She kept Aaron. But she understood now that keeping him had cost her something, and that Hoyt was keeping score. Walking back to the elevator, she found herself cataloging, without meaning to, how many of the people she trusted in the building had been hired by the man she had just crossed, and how few of them she could be certain would take her side over his. Estelle found her in the parking structure that evening, between the concrete pillars where the cameras did not quite reach. She spoke quickly and low, like someone paying out a rope she was afraid to let go of all at once. Your mother gave me something before she passed, Estelle said. She told me to keep it until the right person asked the right question. For 4 years nobody asked. I'd started to think nobody ever would. Her hand tightened on her keys. That man's name, Kessler. When I saw it on the contractor sheet, she stopped. I have to be sure. If Curtis knows I still have it, I don't know what he does. I'm 66. This job is all I've got. What did she give you? Nadine said. But Estelle was already stepping back toward her car, shaking her head. Not here. Not tonight. She looked, for a moment, like a woman at the edge of the coldest water she had ever seen, deciding whether to go in. Soon, she said. I promise. Soon. And then the question sat between all of them, unanswered, gathering weight. What had Marion Calvert hidden well enough to protect for 4 years after her own death? And what was Curtis Hoyt so afraid the world would finally see? Estelle chose a Sunday, and she chose Nadine's kitchen because it was the one room she could think of with no cameras in it. She brought a document box, the kind law offices use, sealed with tape-gone amber at the edges and a label in Marion's handwriting, to be opened by the person who asks. She set it on the table between Nadine and Aaron and did not open it herself. She packed it the last month, Estelle said. When she knew, she'd sit with it in the evenings after everyone left. I thought it was grief. I know now it was homework. Nadine cut the tape. The top folder held the original articles of incorporation, not the covered archive copy, but the signed original. 2 signatures at the bottom in fountain pen ink that had not faded. Marion Calvert, David Kessler. Beneath the names, in the founder's own later hand, a note. David built it. I let it be buried. I never told the truth about how. Aaron did not move. He was looking at his father's signature, a signature he had seen on the backs of old photographs and the flyleaves of books, sitting on a legal document that said the word founder beside it. The second folder was the buyback. In the fall of 1996, 4 months after David Kessler died, his widow had signed away his entire founding stake for a sum that a note in Marion's hand called a fraction of a fraction. There was a valuation memo attached that put Northline's worth at autumn at almost nothing, and there was a second memo, dated 3 weeks after the widow signed, announcing to the board the closing of the Meridian Health contract, the deal every version of the founder's story credited to Marion's vision. It had been known to the chief financial officer weeks before he told a grieving widow her husband's shares were worth pocket change. The chief financial officer's name was on both memos, Curtis Hoyt. He knew the contract was coming, Aaron said, very quietly. He bought her out before it landed, told her it was worth nothing when he already knew what it was about to be worth. And my mother trusted him with the books, Nadine said. She didn't check. Why would she check? By then he'd been her right hand for years. She pressed her palm flat against the table. She found out. Later, didn't she? Estelle nodded. The last year. Something in an old audit didn't sit right, and she pulled the thread herself, at night. So he wouldn't know. By the time she had it all, she was too sick to fight it in the open. She looked at the box, so she built that. Everything he did, laid out cold, and a letter. The last folder held 1 page, in Marion's hand. If you are reading this, you asked, and that means you are the kind of person who should. I did a wrong thing by staying quiet for a right-seeming reason, and quiet is still wrong. David Kessler built this company with his hands. His family is owed what he was cheated of. Find them. Make it right. Whatever it costs. Whatever it costs me. I should have done it while I was alive. I was afraid. Don't be. Nadine read it twice. Then, she slid it across the table to Aaron, so that a son could read, in the founder's own handwriting, that his father had not been forgotten, that a woman had carried his name in a sealed box to the end of her life, rather than carry the lie any further. Aaron held the page a long time and said nothing at all. Some things do not have words the right size. He put his hand over the signature. David built it and left it there. Nadine did not go to Hoyt. She went to the numbers. She hired an outside forensic accounting firm through the general counsel's office, gave them the 1996 memos and the audit trail her mother had started, and told them to build the case as if they would have to defend it to strangers. It took 9 days. When they were done, the report said, in the careful language such reports use, exactly what the sealed box had said in Marion's plainer one, that the buyback had been executed on a material misstatement of value by an officer who possessed non-public information about the Meridian contract, and that the officer had benefited. She took it to the board. Hoyt saw it coming, because men like Hoyt always see it coming, and he arrived at the meeting ready. He did not deny the memos. He was smarter than that. He stood at the head of the table where he had stood for 30 years and told a story instead. A story about a devoted officer who had made a hard call in a desperate autumn to keep a fragile company alive, about valuations being an art and not a science, about the statute of limitations that had closed on all of it decades ago, and then he turned it on Aaron. Ask yourselves who benefits, he said. A man loses his job, his wife dies. He takes a maintenance contract in this very building, and within a month he's produced a photograph and a grieving woman's guilt and a claim on a founding stake worth a great deal of money. Convenient. I've seen it before. He isn't here for his father. He's here for the balance sheet. It was a good speech. It was built to work. Around the table, a few of the older members had begun, almost without knowing it, to nod. Aaron stood up. I didn't come here for a stake. he said. He did not raise his voice. He had never once, in front of any of them, raised his voice. I didn't know whose company this was until Miss Calvert told me in the lobby. I didn't know my father's name was on anything until I sat at a kitchen table 9 days ago and read it. He looked around the table, unhurried. You can keep the shares, every one. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in a courtroom becoming the thing he just called me. I came because a woman asked me a question, and I owed her the truth. That's all. The rest is yours to do or not do. Then he sat down. The room was quiet in a way that boardrooms are not usually quiet. The nodding had stopped. It was the general counsel who spoke next, and what she said was that, whatever the statute barred in court, the board was not a court, that it answered to shareholders and to a name on a plaque, and that keeping a chairman who had defrauded a founder's widow with inside information was a risk no fiduciary in the room could vote to carry. They voted. 7 hands went up to remove him. 1 did not. Hoyt's own. He gathered his folder with steady hands and walked out through the same door he had walked through for 30 years, and no one stood. And the report went, that same afternoon, to counsel who knew what to do with it. Across the table, when it was over, Nadine looked at Aaron, the man who had just handed back a fortune in a single sentence, and found she was looking at him the way you look at something you had misjudged and were glad, so glad, to have been wrong about. They took the correction tape off the founder's wall on a gray Tuesday. It was a small thing, physically, a maintenance worker with a heat gun and a plastic scraper, 10 minutes careful work, but Nadine had asked to be there, and Aaron had come, and so had Estelle, who stood a little apart with her hands folded, watching a name come back into the light that she had kept safe in a box for 4 years. David Kessler, co-founder, 1984. The bronze was a shade brighter where the letters had been protected all this time. It would weather. In a year, it would match. The legal work was slower and less satisfying to look at, but it moved. The company, on the recommendation of its own counsel and the vote of its own board, acknowledged the Kessler family as the rightful heirs to David Kessler's founding interest, a stake that, across 4 decades of the company Marion and David had built, had become worth a sum with too many zeros for Aaron to say out loud. Nadine brought him the rest of the box herself, the part that was not evidence, the personal part. Photographs. A workshop notebook in David's hand that Marion had kept. 2 letters David had written her in the first hard year, signed your partner, in trouble as usual. Marion had saved them for 40 years. She loved him, Aaron said. Not a question. He was turning the notebook's pages the way he'd turned the photograph in the lobby, carefully, at the corners. In the margins were sketches, a housing, a bracket, a coolant line drawn in a hand that could have been his own. I think she loved the person she was when they started, Nadine said. Before it got big, before she made the choice she spent the rest of her life being sorry for. She watched him. I never knew that woman, the one in your photograph. My mother was a monument by the time I was old enough to know her. You gave me back a person. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the moment held more than either would have put into speech. Then Aaron closed the notebook, and something in the air shifted, and got careful again. Because it was easy, in the warm light of a name restored, to forget what the numbers had just made him. On paper, he was no longer a contract technician with a gas receipt in his wallet. He was a man with a founding stake in a company run by a woman he had started. He could admit this to himself now, in the quiet, started to think about in a way that had nothing to do with any of it. And that was exactly the problem. She was the CEO. He was, suddenly, the outcome of a scandal she had solved. Anything between them now would be watched, and weighed, and doubted, by everyone, including, sometimes, themselves. She felt it too. He could see her feel it. They stood a careful arm's length apart in front of a wall, with both their parents' names on it, and neither of them closed the distance, because the distance had just been given 100 new reasons to exist. Whether anything could cross it, whether it should, was a question neither of them was ready, yet, to ask out loud. Aaron came to a decision the way he came to most things, quietly, and then he told her. "I don't want the shares," he said. They were in her office, late, the building emptied out. "Not the way they're written now. If I take a founding stake handed to me out of my father's grave, I spend the rest of my life being the man Hoyt said I was. So does Josie, someday, when she's old enough to read about it. It's legally yours, Aaron. It's owed. I know what's owed." He was quiet a moment. "So let's owe it back to what he actually made. Put most of it in a fund, his name and your mother's, both, the two of them, the way it started. Money for the thing they were good at before it got complicated. Kids who build things, engineers who can't afford the school that would let them. Whatever does the most good." Nadine looked at him a long time. "You're giving away a fortune," she said. "I'm keeping enough that Josie never worries," he said. "The rest was never really mine. It was theirs. This is just where it goes next." They built it together over the following weeks. The Calvert Kessler Foundation, 2 names on a charter this time instead of one, drawn up right, drawn up in the open. It was work, real work, and it gave them a reason to sit across from each other that had nothing to do with a scandal, and slowly the careful arm's length between them stopped being a wall and started being a habit that neither of them, it turned out, wanted to keep. Some evenings the work was finished by 7, and they stayed until 9 anyway, and neither of them ever called it anything but work. She noticed the day he stopped calling her Miss Calvert. He noticed the day she stopped straightening her posture when he walked in, the small unguarding of a person who has decided to be seen. The first grant went out in the fall, to a 2-year college, 2 towns over, enough to put 6 students through a program that taught them to build the kind of things David used to build in a garage. Nadine read the acceptance letter out loud in the empty office, and when she finished, Aaron was not looking at the letter. He was looking at her. He drove her home that night because her car was in the shop, an ordinary errand that neither of them hurried. At her door he did not come in and she did not ask him to, and both of those decisions felt, somehow, like the same kind of care. She watched his taillights to the corner before she went inside and could not have said why. Josie was the one who made it plain, the way children do. Aaron brought her by one afternoon to sign the ceremonial first page of the foundation with a pen too big for her hand, and when she'd finished her wobbling name, she looked up at the two of them standing together and said, matter-of-factly, "Are we going to see the fish after?" "We." She had said we, and folded all 3 of them into it without a thought, and neither adult corrected her. They went to see the fish. They rededicated the Founders' Wall in the spring. A small ceremony, no press, just the people who had earned the right to be there. The plaque was 2 names now, cast fresh in bronze, so the letters would age together instead of one hiding beneath the other. Marion Calvert. David Kessler. Below them, newly added, a single line, founded by 2. Estelle had chosen the words, and when Nadine asked her why those, Estelle only said that some debts get paid forward, and left it there. She had put in for retirement the week before, on her own terms this time, and she stood at the front now, with the ease of a woman who had finally set something down. Aaron held the photograph, the original, out of his wallet, the soft-cornered picture of his father beside a laughing young woman no one had ever let him name, and he set it, framed now, on the shelf beneath the plaque, so that the 2 people who built the place could stand there together again, 30-odd years on, in a light that finally had room for both of them. Josie stood between the 2 adults, with a hand in each. She did not know the whole story, and would not for years. She knew only that the woman in the picture had made her father go quiet in a good way, that the fish tank was on the 4th floor, and that she was, at this moment, exactly where she wanted to be. When she got bored, as children do, she wandered off to press her face to the tank glass, and for a while the 2 adults simply watched her go and did not fill the quiet she left behind. Estelle came to say goodbye before she left, and she stopped in front of the two names longer than she stopped in front of anyone. Whatever she said to the wall, she said too quietly to hear. Then she squeezed Nadine's arm once, nodded at Aaron the way old colleagues nod, and walked out into the spring light without looking back. A woman who had kept a promise to a friend and was, at last, free to stop carrying it. When the small crowd thinned, Nadine and Aaron were left standing in front of the wall, and the distance that had opened between them months ago, the distance made of shares and scandal and everyone watching, had somehow, over a winter of drawing up a foundation and going to see the fish, worn down to nothing without either of them announcing it. He did not say anything grand. That had never been his way, and she had come to love that it wasn't. He just turned his hand, palm up, where it hung between them. She put hers in it. Two names on a wall above them. Two people beneath it who had each gone looking for a parent and found, instead, that the search had quietly led them to each other. Nadine looked at the photograph, at her mother laughing at something no one would ever know, and understood that the picture had done its work. It had carried the truth out of a wallet on a marble floor and set it, at last, in the light. Somewhere behind them a small girl was still naming colors through the glass, and the sound of it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was, Nadine thought, exactly the whole point. Neither of them had gone looking for this. Neither of them let go.